What's up, everybody? Welcome to Overcoming Average with Atlas Technology Solutions as the sponsor. And today I've got a couple of my friends, Terry Ziemniak and Bryan Dennstedt with me. So we've been debating about what to talk about because we all are such interesting people and there's so many topics. But, you know, I was telling you guys before we started that even people I know really well, when you dig in a little bit, you find out stuff about them that you never knew. And so I think it'd be a good idea and I want to ultimately get to kind of the venture that we've started doing some cybersecurity stuff together, and we'll talk about that later. But I wanted to kind of dig into you guys and your sort of origin story. So I'll talk, Terry, first about you, about how we met. Back in my old company, I think we met up at an IT meetup group, which you and I have gone to a couple of those together. And this one in particular, I think you had just stepped out for North Wonders, right? And you were writing cybersecurity content. So I thought, okay, we got to talk. This guy and I will hit it off. So, but it was like a couple of years later when we kind of met at another networking meetup group.
Yeah.
When we really got to talking about. But you've got a pretty interesting past with IT and your jobs. And honestly, I've always been interested in how you got there with Atrium and some of the other places. So, so what's your origin story? Where'd you come from and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, I guess it depends on how far back you want to go. The origin story, I think the biggest influencer is my childhood. I was raised, my father was military, the Navy, so we moved every couple of years. So that lifestyle of get set, pick up and move, get set, pick up and move. The longest duration in one location growing up was in college for me. 4.5 years at Michigan State. But prior to that, it was every 2 or 3 years we're moving all over the place. And I think that influenced my career going forward. So I have borderline career ADD. And I do something for a little bit. I feel like I get pretty good at it, and then I move on to the next thing. So that really is the template for my career. I went to college, computer science degree, so I was a programmer back in the early 90s. And
See, I didn't know your computer science. There's the first one. Interesting.
There you go.
Why computer science?
I stumbled into it. So I went to Catholic schools growing up, and 3 different high schools, and it just so happened my senior year I was in a new high school, and somehow I got into the computer class, and it was the old orange screen monitors, and I think we had those 5.25-inch discs, and we were doing games, I think making snakes bounce around the screen or something like that. I'm like, boy, this is moderately interesting. I wonder what else I can do. So I started playing, and I remember, as a matter of fact, my parents bought their first computer back then. It must have been 87, 88. It was a K-Pro, and we had to boot off these floppies, and it came with this big old manual, and we had no idea what to do with it. So I kind of looked at it, and I was a little intimidated, and I think I may have touched it once or twice, but I'm like, hey, sure, computers, I'll do that in college. And I got into college and just basically stumbled into it. And what I liked about computers is you could find a solution. So eventually, when you're done, if you could break the problem down well, you can find a way to get there, and when you're done. And we did some pretty neat things. It was back in the old days. Interestingly, when I was in undergrad, it was computer programming or computer hardware was all there was. And about 15 years later, I got my master's degree in cybersecurity, and there were 3 master's level degrees in computer security alone. It's just amazing the diversity and the ecosystem and the richness that's available in computers.
Yeah.
Computer business and all the other ways you can take the computer science degrees. So again, my degree and my career is just based on diversity. I've been a database guy, I've been a network guy, I've been a firewall guy. And then I got into computer security because the security guys really need to know a little bit of everything back then. So I had proficiency in the servers and firewalls and everything else. Became the computer security guy at a consulting company, which was fun. And we were building things and architecting and doing pen tests, which are all really cool. And then the saleswoman came by one day to the computer, the cybersecurity group. She says, hey, we have a client who's asking about HIPAA. What's HIPAA? And we all looked around. Oh, I don't know what HIPAA. Wait, what's HIPAA? And we said, well, we need a HIPAA person. And I'm like, sure, why not? I've been doing the same job for 6 months. I'm bored. I need something new. I'll be the HIPAA guy. So I went and I printed out the regulations And I've never, if you've ever had the misfortune of reading actual federal regulations, it's not an easy read. But I read through it and I found it fascinating. Like, this is really cool stuff. I didn't mention actually tying back to my youth. My father was a lawyer in the Navy. He was a judge.
Really?
So I think that kind of mindset was kind of stuck in the back of my brain anyway. Yeah. So I read through it. I'm like, well, this is cool as beans. I love this stuff. And then just from there, I was that bridged me from the technology part of security into the compliance, which led to the executive and strategy and risk sorts of stuff that I've been doing ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, there's so much there. I had no idea. And it makes perfect sense. Terry's one of the only people, by the way, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you enjoy the paperwork side of things. Maybe not enjoy it, but I absolutely hate it. So
he embraces it more than us.
Right. Yeah. He embraces it. I'll say. Yeah.
I say I appreciate it. I see the value of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and you take the time to actually read it and actually go through it. I mean, I know for me, that's why there are lawyers. It's like, hey, look at this, make sure it's okay, and give me a thumbs up or down. I want simple.
It was funny watching my wife roll her eyes when we bought our last car because the guy brings out the stack of paperwork. She's like, "Oh God, Terry's gonna read the whole thing," and I sat there read the whole thing.
Yeah,
yeah.
So let's go back a little bit because that's not a usual story, right? Like especially in that time period. I'm always digging for like the thing that made you rise above everybody else. Like what was it about, especially in that day? And I want to circle back and I'm going to get this fact wrong. And I mentioned it in another podcast the other day, but the time that you were born and you got into whatever you were getting into is so important. And a little known fact, and again, I'm going to butcher this, but Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, and Bill Gates were all born within like a month or two of each other in the same year, similar months. And they were talking about how if they had been born a year later or earlier, it wouldn't have worked out for them the same way because they were in school. They chose this particular profession. Mm-hmm. They had unfettered access to the internet. Some of them got around some certain rules, but it's like that led them to that. So when you were in college, what made that stand out to you? Like, why did you do that and not become a lawyer?
I remember I got into college. I got out of high school, did pretty well in high school, but I did well in high school with zero effort and abysmal study skills. I didn't know what I was doing. I kind of stumbled to being a A- student. Great, go to college. I almost failed out of college. So sophomore year, but realized I didn't know what I was doing. I had no skills. I didn't know how to study, how to prepare or anything like that. And the grades went down. And I was just about to drop out. Then I took a artificial intelligence class.
Really?
I'm like, boy, this is the bee's knees. I love this stuff. And just right there, all of a sudden it became interesting. It became applicable. It was all neat stuff. We actually built our senior project. This is 91, 92. We built effectively what Google Maps did for our campus. So we built driving directions around campus. So we had it tied to the map. GPS wasn't a thing back there. So you would start saying, I can see the stadium at 12 o'clock and I see the library at 8 o'clock, and we would figure out where they're on a campus. And then let's say I want to go to Lucky's Bar, and we'll give them walking directions or driving directions to get wherever they want to go.
Wow.
I'm like, boy, this is just neat stuff. And it's just that.
Yeah. Where did you go to school? Did you already say?
Michigan State.
Michigan State.
Go green.
Yeah. So at that time, why Michigan State? What stuck out about that? Were the programs different from what you could tell, or no?
Again, I think I stumbled into some manner of success. I picked Michigan State, because my parents, they both grew up in Detroit. We moved because of the military, but they kept in-state residency. So though the family was living in Chicago, I got in-states.
I see.
Secondly, frankly, my senior trip in high school, they drove like 15 of us from Chicago up to East Lansing, where Michigan State is, to give us the tour. And it was an overnight thing. And about 9 o'clock, someone brought a whole bunch of cases of beer into the dorm room. And that was my first time having a beer. And, it wasn't pretty, but I'm like, boys, this is it.
Well, and the reason I ask a little bit is I went to UNC Charlotte as an engineering student. And I I had no exposure to computer science previous to that. I mean, absolutely nothing. So when I went to my first computer, it was like computer 1101 or something, the first computer class. It didn't work out good for me because the teacher that I had, and I'm not making this up, the guy, his lifelong dream was to be a comedian. And so now he has a stage, Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
And so he literally would say, do you guys mind if I just tell jokes today? I'm not in. And so of course all the students are, sure, we're all freshmen. We don't care. And I'm thinking computer class is going to be like, press the power button. This is a document. But it was like the first lesson was, okay, hit pound, include, and we started doing HTML like the first day. I had no idea what he was doing. I didn't know what compiling was. I had no idea. And access to computers, even, 12, 15 years ago when I was in college, it wasn't as easy as it is now. I mean, I had to go and like see if the lab was open. Mm-hmm. And we had, at UNC Charlotte, we had a Sun lab. People don't even know what those are, but we had a Unix Sun lab. And I went in there more often because, believe it or not, you guys know me now, but I was a big introvert previous. I was a homeschooled introvert. So I didn't want to go in there and take the Windows machines and the people all in there talking and stuff. So I was like, I'll just go into the Unix thing. And it's funny because now I'm like a Mac guy. It's all Unix based stuff. But there was no VPN. There was no remote access. You had to go to the lab and sit there and work on your program until it was done. So the thing that I found, and I'm curious about the difference, is I don't recall there being AI classes and stuff at UNCC. And a lot of UNCC's bent more towards, they've got good nursing program. I was an engineer, but it wasn't necessarily, I was a computer engineer, but it wasn't necessarily programming as much as it was like electronics and the engineering side. There were a lot of mechanical engineers, civil engineers, and I was an electrical engineer in the beginning. And then I shifted to computers because I just thought they were cool. I liked computers. Little did I know it meant like programming, and right. I've always been a terrible programmer. I got through, but yeah, I even to this day, I feel like some of the languages that they taught in school are a little bit behind the time. Like we were learning Java, and as I've grown up and seen, like the banks use Java. There's a lot of people that use Java, but it seems sort of going out of style, in my opinion. It's you can, and I learned this from a Java developer 6 years after I got out of college. He was like, yeah, you can work on Java for like 2 years and never feel like you actually made anything worthwhile. And I definitely was like, that's the missing link, is we would make these sort of like you. One of my projects was we had the little triangle game from Cracker Barrel, mm-hmm. and you had to beat the game and print out the instructions, which is the dumbest thing. But the logic behind that's very difficult. You've got a triangle for one, a shape, and you've got the logic, and you have to beat the game with the program. And then once you beat it out, print out the instructions. And it just doesn't look cool. I was thinking, why don't we build something like a video game and there's a character walking across the screen? And that was like on the other side of campus. People are designing characters that ultimately
you would animate.
Yeah. And ultimately they put the little character and then it does what my program did. So I kind of blame the school a little bit on not painting that big picture of like, this is how it all ties together. We were just doing Java.
Well, it's interesting because we had a conversation before this started about kids and how they're going to be taught from home over the next year because of COVID, the middle school and the high school kids. Mm-hmm. And that same idea is if these poor kids are going to be watching 4 hours of video a day, you might as well just give up the school year. So how do you make something meaningful? And it's difficult, but I think things are changing. Even in the in the adult world, a lot of the education now, they're saying, what's the value of a college degree? Should you not go and get some computer programming certification or security certification as opposed to sitting for a 4-year degree?
Sure.
But making it applicable, it really makes a big difference because that's when you get interested and you play and you tweak and you really learn things.
Yeah. I think the practical was missing. And I don't know the decisions that are made with why are we going to teach Java versus, I learned C, C++. Objective-C had just come out when I was graduating. So it was like, which Objective-C still, it's barely relevant. You know, a lot of Apple stuff's based off of Objective-C, and now it's Swift and all the iterations of Swift. But you know, I just maybe it was the wrong time, or
Well, but I think also back to the idea of the college, it's a
Yeah.
structural. They're teaching you how to be a programmer.
Sure.
They're not teaching you how to use Java necessarily. My daughter, she's in school. She just took a Java class because it's a foundational how does programming work,
Right.
Yeah.
libraries and functions and all that sorts of stuff.
Sure. Well, and yeah, and that's right. A lot of it was rinse and repeat of logic, like if statements, or statements, and all that stuff, which once you've done it, it's like, oh yeah, another if statement. It's all the same, right? And the other big thing that at least I struggled with in college was when you would go into that Unix lab. I mean, it was black and white text. It was not fancy. It was no error checking. So when you'd go to compile the code, it was just, sorry, doesn't work. And it's like, where's the missing semicolon? I know there's one in there. And then towards the end of my, which I don't know if it was antiquated computers or if it was just the time, but we got Visual C, I think, where like if you missed a semicolon, it would turn red and say you missed a semicolon. And I thought, why didn't they do this in the beginning?
And now we don't even care if there's a semicolon or not, right? I mean, they're optional at this point. So
Exactly. Now it
but
understands.
I mean, we're building on top of each other as we go, for
Yeah.
sure. So it's interesting to see because, I mean, it sounds like we both had a very similar experience. You know, doing almost a little bit of machine learning, knowing how the and/or operators in the CPU actually work, and the people going through computer science now, I mean, they don't even know if they touch on that anymore.
Right.
And
I
think
had to
there's a
write.
big difference between scripting and programming, because now I feel like 90% of the people call themselves programmers, but they're really just scripters.
Yes. Yeah.
And they don't really know what a recursive function is or a map and
Well,
some of those things.
A lot of the things that I spent time on as a computer engineer and not a computer scientist was efficiency of power in the circuits, which is like, I mean, it's super important actually, but it's not on the surface very practical. You know, like I remember in my programming classes, we did sorting so many times, and you would say, okay, I logically understand this one. They would say, okay, we'll never use that one again. Here's the one that actually is efficient for the power of the circuit. And, you know, at the time I used to think, well, that isn't, how important is that? Well, it was very important back then. And I would say it's still very important for battery life. And that's how we have iPhones and tiny little devices that can live like that. But, yeah, you know, the education, I feel like, it could use a little work. Obviously, I've been out of college a long time, but Brian's totally right. Like I remember thinking to myself, why couldn't somebody write a program that helps me write programs, you know? And now that's what we have. And this is a classic story. You guys will both laugh at this one, but I had one of the programs I did in my Java class required the square root to be calculated. I didn't know. I don't know if the teacher told us and I didn't listen. It was in the book. I didn't know you could just include math, SQRT. So I did a page of code to derive the square root, and it worked, but it was only like 4, decimal points. It was a disaster. And I remember I took my code in and I thought, oh my gosh, that was the hardest part. And the teacher said, you could have just done this line. And I was like, I almost wanted to say, well, that's your fault. You should have, why are you telling me now? I wasted all that time. But it was a good learning lesson.
You got bonus
for me.
points, didn't you?
Of course not. But I remember thinking, well, it makes sense that somebody's already done this before and you just do one line and it includes it in there. So, lesson learned, right? Like that's, I guess, the point of college is to learn.
Yeah. And now I'm working on a couple of mobile apps for another client right now, and it's just include CocoaPod, and it just dumps everything into the frame. It's like you're literally doing 5 lines of code to pump out a mobile app. So
yeah,
it's impressive.
And
how far we've come, but like it's what we need to do, but the evolution to get there is going to just naturally take 5 years or 10 years to get there. And we're just like, well, why can't we just get 10 smart guys in a room and get that piece done for us guys, right? But it has to, I don't know, society has to evolve towards that, right? So we'll see.
Yeah, well, you know, it's the same with websites. Like, I remember my brother was a graphic designer, so he was on the other side of school, and he was working on colors. And even back then, they had. Do you guys remember zip drives?
Oh yeah.
These big zip drives. It was like a big deal for our family to like go and buy a zip drive, and it got stuck in the machine and it ate it. And I remember those
I just
things.
shredded mine like 6 months
Did you
ago.
really?
I had like a stack of 20 of them. Like, I don't know what's
Like
on
5
them, but I'm gonna
megabytes.
shred them at least. Yeah.
But yeah, it's he, you know, he was in a totally different world. And actually, that's another story. But he's the reason I got into using a Mac. Actually, is that in the graphics world they were using the Macs. They had those colored iMacs, and the brand new Mac Pro had just come out, the cheese grater looking one, and it was a big deal. Our family like went and bought it, and we went down to South Park, and there's like one guy walking around the Apple store, just only weirdos and nerds in there, and we're like, we'd like to buy a computer, you know. So, but you know, those experiences, going back to the websites, my brother was learning, I think it was called Dreamweaver, the website builder back then. And now, you know, you buy Wix or Squarespace and you just throw your pictures in there and it's done.
Well, it's more and more levels of abstraction. You know,
Yeah.
you don't need people that can write assembly code like we did 20 some years ago.
Right. Yeah. You know, but there's something to be said though. And Bryan, you kind of touched on it. Like, somebody's got to understand that foundational level. Like, somebody still needs to know how power works on the circuits and stuff, you know? So, I think that's where, like Bryan, your business comes in, of like the website maintenance, where either you don't want to deal with it, or you're like, I just want this picture to be like over here a little bit. And I'm going to spend 3 hours trying to figure out how to tweak that thing, or it's not the right ratio. I mean, I have a guy right now, he's trying to submit a podcast, and Apple wants the logo to be the perfect size. Otherwise you're out. Like, Apple has rules. You got to get the logo right. There's little minute things in there with whether it be an app development or a website that you just need somebody that knows that extra little bit of, let me get in there and kind of tweak the code a little bit. My neighbor, Jeremy Igo, he runs the Carolina Huddle website, and he does it all himself. You know, he starts with a nice template and then goes and tweaks the code, because sometimes you just can't get that button exactly the way you want. And you need an expert, somebody that kind of knows how to get in there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about my friend, Charles Long. He just started swiftappschool.com. And Charles, I'm hoping to have him on the podcast. He's from Asheville, North Carolina. And he's been at a big school up there for a long time. And in the summer, they teach kids Swift. And I've just always thought that was a really great thing, because you don't get excellent coders. And this is a broad stroke, but you don't get excellent coders teaching, because they don't make enough money. So if you're a developer, you're going to go get a job somewhere and make double the money as a low-end developer somewhere than you would teaching. But we have great people like Charles who have kind of said, look, I care about the students. I think that this is the future, because programming is not simple. It's not something that you just learn overnight. You need to practice, and you need to understand the logic and everything to use any language. At least today you do. But I think Charles would agree with this, that trapped inside the minds of these young kids is just amazing ideas, but they just don't know how to put it on, you know, paper, as it were. So I'm excited to see what Charles is doing. He's transitioned that course. It used to be a physical, kids get together and do the Swift class. They come out with an app on the other side, and now they're just going to do it virtually. So it's exciting times with the coronavirus and everything. We're still finding, like, how can we train kids? They're sitting at home with nothing to do. He's got a great couple of ideas where they're going to virtualize a desktop so the kids can have a powerful computer with any machine and just be able to program in the cloud, which is really awesome.
That's the amazing stuff. I mean, my daughter's already programming. I don't think she realizes
Really?
she is. I mean, she's got the couple apps on her iPhone or on the iPad or whatever, and it's just these simple little shapes, and you drag them and you have to bump them into this, and then it turns into a different shape, and then she has to put it in this hole. And when you think about it, that is really just what programming is translation of this to that to
Yeah.
get it to what you need it to be. And she's basically learning that. And I'm really struggling with like, will she ever really learn to write? Like, I mean, my cursive is not the best.
Writing's
but,
irrelevant.
Right.
now,
But will she even learn to write? I mean, I'm sure she will, but not like we did growing up,
Right.
Yeah.
pre-iPad.
I think there's a whole other skill set though the kids are going to need over the next
For sure.
generation. My middle boy, he struggles with reading and writing. Really did. He's caught up now. But I remember talking to the teacher several years ago. Like, well, his spelling's really atrocious. What do we do about it? It's like, don't worry about it because they're spell checkers.
Grammarly's here.
Exactly. So, but it's interesting. It'll get caught up. Don't worry about it. It's all voice activated, and we text. He uses his voice all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's-
I'm a terrible speller,
Yeah.
and that's what I do. Because I just was never good at spelling. I was always good at math, and I worked on it really hard, but I was just terrible at it. So I'm thankful for dictation, and I think the future of what technology is going to bring, which we could go on a tangent forever about, like maybe seeing technology companies bring back, the writing and then it turns to text. Apple's actually releasing that with their next version of the iPad. So you'll be able to write text and choose if you want to convert it. That'll be interesting to see how bad our handwriting is, if Apple can figure it out or not.
Yeah, but they'd be like going back to the old days and saying, "Hey, we have a better butter churner." Like, well, it's really great, but I don't need to make my own butter anymore.
Right.
Do we need to handwrite anymore?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of the classic Steve Jobs quote is, if you ask the people what they want, they'll just say, a faster horse and buggy. They wouldn't say, I want a car, And to think about things becoming irrelevant, I learned this a long time ago, but I read Moby Dick. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's a huge book, but back then the biggest thing was catching these whales, to kill the whale, to get the oil, to light the lamps in your house. As soon as the light bulb was invented, we don't need to kill the whales anymore. They're just we don't need that anymore. So I think there's things coming, especially in the technology world, that's what kind of revolution we're going to see with.
Yeah, and I think
for sure. I mean, AI, IoT, and VR. I mean,
Yeah.
those three things are just gonna. People don't even understand it.
No.
And we can't keep up with it as a society. Our laws can't keep up with this stuff. The
Absolutely.
businesses can't deal. Our communities, all these cyber crimes and inappropriate stuff for the kids online and stalkers and all that sorts of stuff. Identity theft. What was that 10 years ago?
Right.
Nothing.
Stealing a guy's wallet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're so right. I was working for an AI company up in Pittsburgh, and I think some of these old companies, this particular place was working with one of the biggest car companies in the world, and their answer to Tesla was this they called it a tiara. Basically, we'll just put a bunch of cameras on top of the car. So you buy your, XYZ car and you just stick a bunch of cameras on top of it. And now it's a Tesla, right? But it looks ridiculous. It's like they're clearly trying to catch up. There's some guy in a boardroom like, oh, we got to catch up with Tesla. They're not they're not innovating, and I see the Tesla stock continue going up. They're doing stuff that's, in my opinion, super interesting. Even if Tesla crashes and burns, somebody else is going to come along and say that was a good idea. And that's what cars, I think, are going to be in the future, self-driving cars. But to go back to the AI company, Terry, you were saying even our laws can't catch up. I was saying, so, I bet there's a lot of regulation around this. And they said, nope. I was like, seriously? They're like, yeah,
They don't know what to do, right?
They haven't caught on yet. It's like, it's going to take a car to drive by a senator and there's nobody in it. He's going to say, we should do something about that.
Well, they're still prosecuting people off 40-year-old cybercrime laws. It's crazy, and it's just completely meaningless, these concepts, and you can't prosecute the people.
Well, I mean, I don't know. The analogy that popped into my head is, I used to live in Ohio, and Ohio's got a lot of Amish, and those people just don't have radio, cars, all that stuff. And then you move up to the Mennonites, and they have cars and radios, but they don't watch TV. And then
Really?
So there's just these, there's 7 billion people on the planet, and there's so many people that are just stuck in their little zones and their comfort zones. And there's still so many businesses are still run on client server architecture, and you go into these companies, you're like, you're still doing the client server thing. Like everybody's moving to the cloud now, right? Like,
Yeah.
Well,
so-
but in the old days, the businesses could survive with an old model, and an old model
sure.
can be supported by old
it
technology.
still can be done today.
Yeah.
I think there's no reason why you have to upgrade, but like we're all on the bleeding edge pieces of it. So like we're expecting to go into a place and say, we need to get you in the cloud and we need to do this. And
Well, and I mean, from an infrastructure standpoint, there are some things that are holding us back. I mean, we're lucky to live in the Charlotte area because the day Google Fiber was announced, Spectrum's bandwidth went through the roof. It's like, oh, we have 300 by 30, and it's like I was just paying 50 by 5, and now you've got 300 all of a sudden for the same price. So that innovation and that Google saying we're going to put fiber in the ground was a big change. With 5G, I think that's going to be a big change that I don't think we know what will be yet. Because when every device has the ability to go that fast, now we don't have a limitation. Like, because the client server thing, for instance, I still have a lot of clients in the creative space with marketing, architecture. They still have to have an on-site server because they've just got not only
huge files, right?
big files, but also multiple. Like an architectural file might have 50,000 tiny little pieces in it, and the cloud doesn't always catch those little changes, and so we're still using local servers for them. And we'll use Dropbox for like their Microsoft Word documents or whatnot. But that's just simply an infrastructure thing. Once everything is gigabit everywhere, aside from us all getting cancer, it'll be
Right. Well, but I mean, like that situation, like I know there's the Azure local sync systems and those kinds of things. So you can do all this stuff, but it's the time and energy to upgrade.
Yeah.
Like it's just like we were talking about with the Wix websites for, you can't do every little nuance. You're going to need to get the expert to help you massage it. But where do you want to spend your time?
Where do you want to spend your money?
Yeah. That's the two big questions, right? Because we, when we were going to school, we knew everything about the internet. There was only 27 websites, and there was only these 3 dial-up providers. Or
Ask Jeeves.
I just felt like I knew everything. You asked me a question about anything with the computer, I knew it. 100% knew it. And now we've gotten so specialized that somebody comes to me and says, hey, you got these cybersecurity things. I know enough to be dangerous, but when we get past this threshold, I need to call Terry and get him to come in and sit down.
And that momentum of the knowledge growth is going to keep growing and growing, and more specialization.
Exponentially faster and faster.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and I want to bring up a topic, Terry, you and I talked about with cybersecurity a while back. And I've actually used this sort of conversation with a client. I was working with a customer. It was a credit union up north. And they, on their Macs, we were deploying these Macs, they had every cybersecurity software you could imagine. I mean, literally, they had like 7 or 8 pieces of software that were basically, in my estimation, doing the same thing. And so I was talking to them about, whoever's in charge of this stuff, like it might be a good idea to just say, let's take a step back and evaluate, like, how much are we spending on all these softwares? How much is it going to cost when the person can't go to do their job because the third, AI antivirus stopped them from using Adobe Cloud for the day, and those sort of things. It's like the big picture. And the topic I was going to bring up is that you were saying sometimes the answer is buy more insurance, right? Like kind of look at the risk and say it's worth taking a risk. Like if somebody gets on our computer, what's the worst that could happen? They hack the security guard's Mac and get a picture off of it or something. But tightening down on
it's those little things like the hack that we saw, in the past 24 hours, right? I mean, Bill Gates,
Twitter,
the Twitter hack. I mean, Bill Gates, Elon, all these big figures were hacked, and it was because of a social engineering on a Twitter employee's computer, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking for sure these guys got third-party OTP validation on their accounts, right? But it was a Twitter situation. So
we've all been to
crazy.
We've all been to the Lake Norman IT meetup, and a couple of the guys there that are IT directors of the bigger places were talking about that strategy of like, let's, we need to button down on the people that have access. You know, the secretary of the CEO, they're going to have the CEO's calendar and file level access and the CTO and, you know, they're going to have all this stuff. But I see a lot of groups that are just spending an enormous amount of time and money running around to make sure that, like I said, the janitor's computer's encrypted. You know, it's like, really? I mean, what's the worst that could happen in that scenario? Partially because the tools are not great for deploying this stuff, for one. I mean, it's getting better. That's what I'm doing, is we're deploying all those crummy softwares that these people are pushing out. But I just can't imagine how much. It's almost like any product that's on the market these people are buying because of fear. They're afraid to get hacked.
Well, it's fear, but it's also, that's the message they're hearing. They're hearing it from the sales guy. Like,
Right.
boy, if you only buy my product, then you'll be secure. I heard a quote a while ago. There was a security expert, Bruce Schneier, and he said, amateurs hack systems, professionals hack the people.
Exactly.
And this was 10 years ago, and that's exactly what's going on. I was doing some research for a cloud native client. I did reading some Gartner documents. Gartner points out one of the top risks on the cloud is identity management, because the patches are all done now. Generally, your network segmentation's done well, your DOS, your backups, all the core fundamental stuff's done really well in the cloud.
Right.
But if you can't stop Susie Q from reusing her password at Azure versus, you know, where she buys her shoes, wherever,
Right.
you're gonna have a problem. If you don't lock down the rights to the minimum access, you're gonna have a problem. If you don't terminate well, you're gonna have a problem.
You're totally right. And going back to the cloud and local sync, you know, I have some people that they're hyper worried about connecting to their domain. We don't want the Macs talking to our domain. But on their domain, it's a legacy box. It's not doing two-factor authentication. And it's like, you know, you could get rid of this server. You could get rid of this guy that manages the server. You could buy two-factor Duo or just do whatever is built in, and everybody's going to be a lot more secure. It's a lot of it's job security. I think some people they're trying to keep their job. I see that a lot in security, as people they kind of fear monger, like, oh, you're going to get hacked, you know, and there's relevance to the fear. Like, they should be afraid. But at the same time, there needs to be rationale, and hopefully, you know, we can kind of bring that rationale to customers and stuff in the future, saying, look, let's look at this holistically. Like, you want to run your business. You don't want to just spend all your money on cybersecurity and never be efficient with what you're doing. So
It's been a problem with cybersecurity over the years, is what numbers should we look at? What really are the risks?
Yeah.
If you take your time and look through, the FBI has excellent cybercrime stats. Over the last 2 years, the number one cybercrime, as reported by the FBI, business email compromise. It's just someone sending in a fake email. Hello, I'm your vendor. I have a new bank routing number. Yep. Please pay the next invoice to this number. The number one crime 2 years running, by far the number one problem.
Really?
Antivirus software doesn't solve that problem. Encryption doesn't solve that problem. That's a people problem, and that's a process problem. But the point being, go look at the cybercrime stats. Go look at Verizon's data breach report. Go look at the insurance companies now are producing relevant metrics on the payouts they have. Those are great places when you want to consider what you need to worry about, because you can worry about everything. You can worry about meteor strikes. Yeah. What do you need to really worry about? Look at those metrics on crime and from the insurance companies. That tells you where you need to focus.
And I mean, yeah, as a CTO who's been there, I mean, the places that I've been and where the hacks have come from, it's all been social engineering on the email. Mm-hmm. That's the one that has always gotten through past the defenses. Even if you train them and whatever, somebody else is going to click on something and type in a password that they shouldn't have.
Yeah. I just got one 2 days ago. It was just like somebody's aunt was retiring, and, you know, we're wanting to divvy the funds up. You seem like a nice guy. Click here to, you know, it didn't get even in my spam folder. It came straight to the inbox.
I had a client of mine that got hit with business email compromise. Hey, I'm your vendor, send me this information. And they ended up, we almost got paid out. It was like $12,000 a few years ago. We collected, it wasn't a big deal. But as we were doing the postmortem, brought in the executives. I said, this is what happened. This is the corrections. This is what we're going to do about it. the CFO raises his hand. He says, Terry, why don't we just block every single email with the word invoice in it? Like, well, we'd be secure, but we wouldn't be able to do business.
Right. Yeah. And that's the balance, right? Like I go up against these security guys a lot when I'm doing this training, especially I'm typically the Mac guy coming into an all Windows world, and they're already uncomfortable because they don't understand the Mac. So they just kind of hate on it like, oh, these Macs are stupid. And the truth is they just don't understand it, right? Like Unix has been and will be a solid OS for decades. It's their misunderstanding of it. So a lot of times I'll go through and I call it the Apple security stack. And I'll say, here's what a Mac does out of the box. You don't even have to have MDM. It does boom, 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 boom. And there's like 20 things that I can list. But they do go back to like, well, I don't want to be in the news. And you know, there's a lot of fear and I think it's valid because once you've been hacked, you just feel violated and it's just terrible. I had it happen to one customer. They, unfortunately for them at my old company, they just didn't follow what we had instructed. They were waiting on buying a new system. It was so slow that it would take days to back up their multiple terabytes of data. So long story short, they got the CryptoLocker virus. And, you know, we're talking about hackers here. Like these guys, they're not stupid. They don't get lucky. They strategically strike certain things and they've planned it out. So it was what they did is they hacked an internet facing account that was for like a scanner, and IT guys do it all the time. Oh, we need a scanner account, make scanner passwords. Welcome1. That was the password. But they didn't hack that account. They got in and they created themselves another domain admin account and they stuck it somewhere where no one would look. It wasn't in the list of users. It was called Bob, and it was just over here in a random place with administrator access. And they waited like probably 2 or 3 months, and then they hit it again. They struck. So of course, our guys start to restore. The restore takes several days, and in the midst of that, they hit it the second time with Bob, who had been sitting there on that machine for months. So it was very strategic. They did the CryptoLocker. Ultimately, they paid them. They paid them the Bitcoin, and they got part of their data back. They got one of the encryption keys and got part of it back. But that company was an engineering firm. They could have gone under. I mean, all of their data is on this antiquated server. It wasn't virtualized, like backed up. It was a disaster, like perfect storm, right? And they didn't listen to our advice, and they kind of suffered for it. So when you experience something like that, you know, you'll spend any amount of money the next day on cybersecurity.
And I think that's the fundamental problem. You said they wouldn't listen to you. I think business owners typically think of security as a problem to be solved.
Right.
You don't solve security. Security is a business risk, and you need to manage the risk, which is why people are able to go in there and sell them one more piece of software.
Right.
Now you're secure. If I sell you this, now you'll be secure. You're never done being secure.
Right.
And that's a fundamental mindset that business owners typically don't get.
Well, and Terry, you always use the phrase, you know, are you secure enough? And, you know, I love that because it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, it means exactly what you're saying. It's like, well, you're never at 100%. We've had those discussions too with HIPAA compliance. It's just a constant reevaluation, and things change.
It's so funny because I was just thinking about this in like the real world situation of, I grew up north where everybody has a basement, right? So you have the basement windows and you put the locks on those and that kind of thing. And like, are people going to sneak in the basement or whatever? And now here I have like just that little crawl space underneath the house, and you're on a slab or something, so you don't have this problem. But like, you know, literally the only thing really stopping anybody from breaking into any of our houses is a small little deadbolt that we all know with a decent crowbar can be broken down in 2 seconds. So
exactly.
How secure are we really at our own homes?
Exactly.
Front? Is it secure enough or not? I don't know. I mean,
that's the whole psychology of security too.
Right.
I love, like, I can just read stuff like that for hours. Why do people make certain decisions? Why are you nervous in an airplane, but you're comfortable driving your car?
Yeah.
Where you're more
statistically, it's not.
That's exactly
Very
it.
true.
Yeah.
When I want to go back and tell a story about the social engineering that I saw happen firsthand, and I couldn't believe how close these people got. It was at one of my managed service clients from years ago. It was a big church, and you know, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. So these people are very public, and you can just Google their names and you see them, and you see who they are and who they're married to and all that stuff. And one day a call came into the front desk, just random call, phone rang all the time. And this particular guy, I may get the details wrong, but they had a son that had some disabilities. And so they called and said, hey, this particular guy, his son's in trouble. They're on vacation, blah, blah, blah. You know, we need wired $10,000, da, 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 da. It got all the way to the CFO's desk, and he was getting the wire ready. And it happened in like 20 or 30 minutes. And no one thought, have they called this guy? No one called him to see if it was legitimate. They got all the way to just about to click send on the wire. And somebody said, has anybody called him? They picked up the phone and goes, no, it's sitting right here with me. It's fine. And then the person hung up and it was over. You know, so they got that close from social engineering that quickly.
Well, take a second and think about, what are we talking about? Social engineering. What does that mean? People are hardwired to respond a certain way. We're animals that hang out together. That's what humans do. We help each other, and we're wired to respond to certain ways. And that's exactly what the attack focuses on.
And they try speed. I mean, in the first example I gave, that was patience. You know, just wait, do the thing, do it again, wait, and then you'll get your money. But this was all about speed. And I mean, they had research. They knew this guy. They knew the names. They knew the ailments. They knew he was on vacation. I mean, how do you know somebody's on vacation? You know, but they figured it out. You know, in a place like that, there's people walking around the halls all the time. All you got to do is sit in the lobby, say you're meeting with somebody, and over here, oh, so and so's going on vacation next week. You know,
or you read it on Facebook.
Yeah, or you read it on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it is a very valid thing, but I think balance is really important. And that's hopefully, you know, as a business owner and all of us having our own companies and investments and our own stuff that we're doing, understand efficiency. You know, we're not all just security all the time. We understand a balance of a security and then also getting work done at the end of the day.
And I think it's a reminder too that security is not just technology. They say the three pillars are people, process, technology. What are your processes when you change your bank routing information? You should have a second set of eyes on it. You know, how well do you train your people? On top of the obvious technology of encryption and antivirus.
I think that stat is really funny because I was thinking through this, like, well, people are getting more educated, right? But to hear that that people are still clicking on emails, it just blows my mind. Like, stop clicking on those emails. Or get a Mac, and then you don't have to worry about it as much.
And it's those simple things too, like just putting at the bottom of your invoice, we have not changed any of our routing numbers. If anybody asks you to do so, please call us to verify the correct routing number. Like, put that on your invoice. Like, don't mess around with this.
Well, and have you guys? I don't know if you've seen the billboards, but for the coronavirus scams, and it said, "Don't be scammed by COVID." And I thought, what does that mean? And it took me until the other day to understand that there are people out there and they're just targeting, you know, hey, your government refund check's coming in the mail, but we need your bank account information to get it pushed through. Pass it on over and I'll wire it to you. And, oh, sure. You know, so there's people out there scamming. That's what it means if you hear the COVID scams. People are fishing for, you know, your bank account information.
They say people have nowadays a social media their addiction. They're addicted to Facebook. You need to look, you need to respond. And that's just the way we're training ourselves, and the bad guys are leveraging it. Hey, I have a new video of J-Lo doing a dance. Better click on that. I want to take a look at that.
Yep. Yeah. You know, I don't know what the world's going to bring, but as we've talked about a lot of things with security, but then also the rise of technology where it's more and more integrated into our cars, into our wrists and our cell phones. And Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan a couple of weeks ago for the second time. I don't know if you listened to that, but he talked about the implant that they're working on in the brain, you know, and it's like, man, I don't know. Sounds cool, but when I think about how often, you know, my iPhone crashes or something like that, I'm like, no.
Have you seen that? What's that show, Upload? Have you seen
No.
Upload yet on Amazon? Oh, that's phenomenal.
I gotta
like
see
that's
it.
the beginning of, you know, I don't know, the Borg.
Okay.
whatever it is, but it's
Well, in a way, though, I do think I forget who it was, but they brought up the Star Trek movie where they like saved the whales or something, and they were saying I haven't seen it in so long I don't recall, but they were talking about how they looked back at surgery and like, what you drill holes in people's head, like
exactly.
And I do think that that's probably going to be us. I think
you can see it right now with COVID. Like, the assumptions we had 3 months ago on how to treat this have completely changed with how to deal with it now.
Yeah,
and that's just been 3 months. So
and I mean, in a way, it's been good to kind of have the pressure turned up, and now people are going to be more hyper aware of these things. And by the way, where are all these people that didn't wash their hands? But I don't know. It's just, Apple's has a new thing on the next version of the Apple Watch that when it detects you washing your hands, it gives you a timer. So you gotta I gotta wash my hands for. So it seemed kind of funny at first, but then I'm thinking that's a good thing. If somebody even stops to wash their hands on the way out of the restaurant, I'm like, oh my gosh.
But that's a perfect example of just some silly thing that we're driving forward with an app of some sort, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be 50 programmers tackling that kind of a problem, and one or two of those programmers are going to say it would be great if there was a little library that did this.
Yeah.
And then they put that library out there into the world. Like, I don't know how many people are going to use the hand washing app,
right?
But they've contributed to the evolution of the programming language.
Right.
Somebody else will use that for something else in the future, and so it's the intangible benefits of it.
The hashtag include handwashing.h.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
So I want to talk a little bit about our venture that we've been working on. So I think at least for now we're calling it Evolution 365. So basically the concept is all the stuff that we're talking about now, we're going to try to help implement in businesses with strategy and implementation of security concepts and general just technology. Because again, I for one have customers that, I mean, they're fantastic, like amazing at cytology exam or whatever they're doing. They just know that world and they're passionate about it. But when it comes to Office 365 and changing passwords, they just don't want to have anything to do with it. And that's why, we have the company that we have with Atlas to do that stuff, to take that burden off the plate. But this is a little bit different, specifically for having kind of an angle of cybersecurity to say, look, this stuff might be over your head. We're going to stay on top of the latest and greatest. We're going to know the stats. We're going to know where to spend your time and money. I think about some of these customers that if I could just get us in front of them, we could probably save them just boatloads of money on software and, do a little training, and training would save probably way more than they would ever spend on the software, So look for more from Evolution 365. Right now, is it evolution365.com?
That's correct.
So go there, fill out the form, and then we'll contact you and figure out the best way. If you're a fit for us, if we're a fit for you, we'll figure it out together. So
I remember early in my career, we had Microsoft come through our organization, and we were maybe a 6-hospital system up north. And Microsoft came in, I think their intent was to audit us for licensing, which went fine and well. But while they're at it, they did an efficiency audit. And the efficiency audit showed that we, even though we're spending millions of dollars on licenses each and every year, we're using about 7% of the capabilities of Microsoft Office at the time. And I think that's what it helps resonate the idea of a CTO, a CIO. Are you using your technology well?
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of the skill set and experience that we can bring, whether it's in the technology space or security space. Are you secure enough? Is one question. Are you using your technology wisely is the second question. Are you really driving value out of these two costs, these two necessary costs? Are you doing it wisely?
Absolutely.
It's just the two anecdotes to match up to that is just like, you heard all the stuff up to this point that we've been talking through here, right? And so we're all on the bleeding edge. We're already, well versed in the cloud and all these latest, greatest technologies. And you're trying to sell your widgets or you're trying to do your business kind of a thing. But this has been our expertise, and we know how to come in and help bring that efficiency in. And I think you said it even earlier, Terry, on the it's the people, the process, and the product. Those three things, I think all of us know how to do those three things really well, but we work really well in conjunction with each other on how to solve those kinds of things. Like, I know I can do cybersecurity up to this threshold. At a certain point, though, and I did it just a couple weeks ago. I called Terry up and I said, I'm going to need your help on this kind of a project. Is this something you want to dig in with me? And we're working on that. And the same thing with you, Chad, on that other piece. So we know when to find that balance and how to help solve those problems. Because that's bottom line. You summarize it is, whatever you're paying us to do on that front, we're going to save you that much money or more, in my opinion, with the efficiencies that we're going to bring in to solve some of those problems. So.
Yeah, because I think what these small and mid-sized businesses really are lacking in the space is an executive presence.
Yeah.
I'm not the firewall guy anymore. I'm not the antivirus anymore. I'm not the antivirus guy. But I can bring decades of experience bridging the technology and the business. And I think that's what we can all bring to the table. Small, mid-sized businesses cannot pay $300,000 a year for someone like us to work full-time. So they have a fractional technology or security leader to make sure your technology is aligned with your business goals.
Yep.
And if your technologist doesn't understand your business goals, you may need a new technologist. Same thing on the security guy side. If your security guy is selling you one more antivirus product, but he doesn't understand your business goals, if he doesn't understand when you are secure enough, you got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the experience we can bring to help leverage, to properly utilize the resources you really must spend in this space anyway. Spend it wisely.
For sure. And I'll speak for you guys, and hopefully this applies to me as well, but in the technology world and cybersecurity world both, personalities are lacking. There's not a lot of personalities, and especially trainers and teachers that can go to that CEO and say, this is why, this is, it's not just it's because it's secure, we need to buy the software, and here's the invoice. I think all of us have the skill set clearly in the fact that we've grown our own businesses to communicate with those high level people and explain to them on a human level enough to where they just understand enough, and then they say, okay, I got it. Let's implement this. They don't care about the details. We understand the details, and if we don't know the specific detail, we know the people that know the details. But communication is absolutely important. I've found in explaining to those people, bridging the gap between this tech and this CEO, and they're not speaking the same language. And it's like, all I know is this guy brought me a scary looking piece of paper and said I need to just sign this or else we're going to get hacked. Maybe it is the right decision, but somebody needs to translate that and say, here's why, and here's the risk, and here's the balance. And I think that's where the combination of us can really step in and help.
Yeah, I think risk and business are the two pieces often missing in a security strategy, probably in tech strategy as well. Is you need to make sure again, security doesn't exist in and of itself. You need security to run your business.
Yeah.
Technology doesn't exist.
And it doesn't. I agree with all that stuff, and the last piece to add into that is just the accountability piece of it. Is are we measuring this, and are we holding the team that you have in place accountable to hitting these goals on that part? Because that's a really important thing to measure. Is even in the little bit of stuff that we've been doing with the business so far, we're holding each other accountable to hitting certain milestones here and there. So.
Yeah, and again with the communication, the accountability. I mean, I see it all the time coming from the Mac side where somebody just got picked out of a hat and said, "You're going to be the Mac guy." All these marketing people want Macs, and we need to implement it. And they're a little bit frustrated, but once I explain to them and I show them that I'm on their team, I'm going to help you achieve your goal. It's not that we're in there to put anybody down, but it's like, hey, let me help you get this project and make you look good. And that always goes off well. I'm thinking of a client that I worked with years ago, and at the time they were just a little startup, and they were all new to these Apple devices, and we really worked on it, communicated with the higher level people. Hey, we need X number of weeks to get this project done. And it went off fantastic. And it clearly shows because that company's now huge. I mean, they've blown up, but they were able to communicate. They were able to use their technology wisely. So communication, working with the right people, and coming alongside the people that are, the boots on the ground, I think is really important. So, Well, guys, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure. So we'll have to do it again sometime, and we'll get Bryan's origin story next time.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.